We're live here, LENSEC Live. What's your perspective? And I am excited about our guest today. Another great, interesting interview. And I think every day when we're hearing more and more about COVID-19, what's going to happen with schools, this guy is a great expert that I'll have a lot of good questions, but I want to learn more about him first. So I'm excited to welcome to him CEO Gary Sigrist, and he is of Safeguard Risk Solutions. Gary, thanks for stopping by. What's your perspective?
I'm glad to be here. I appreciate the invitation and a chance to talk to your listeners today.
Absolutely. And then everyone definitely needs to tune in because everything changes in security. And your years of security, tell us how you got involved in security.
Well, it's a long story, but I'll tell it anyways. I graduated from The Ohio University in 1982 with a bachelor's degree in elementary education. I actually started out as an 8th grade science teacher. Went back to school, got a master's thinking I was going to be a principal, and then ended up going to the police academy. So for 22 of my 30 years in education, I did both. I was a police officer. I was an educator. When I retired from the district, they had promoted me from being a teacher to head of safety and security for the 5th largest school district in the state of Ohio. In my retirement, I did a lot of work overseas in Southeast Asia. And then finally wanting to kind of stay here in Ohio, I went ahead and started my own company, thinking I was going to start really just in the K-12 market. I quickly moved into higher ed, healthcare, and then businesses started calling up because there were just concerns about safety and security in their organizations.
Very, very interesting. Keith, it's interesting how people start, especially in the education field, into other fields, like myself, Keith.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah, you're a former educator, and Gary has a great deal of experience. Good to see you again, Gary. It's been quite a while. I think Gary's experience as an educator and an administrator and a law enforcement officer really lends a lot of credibility to the work that he does, especially in the school realm.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. All right. So, Gary, how did you get involved in your business, Safeguard Risk Solutions? Tell us the story.
Well, it was, I had to retire too early because of the retirement system. I still wanted to continue the work that I was doing. And there were just, this was right about at the time of Sandy Hook. And there were a lot of people that just had questions and concerns, and they needed someone to help them understand what they needed to do as an organization to keep at first in the K-12 and higher ed, their students and staff safe. And then there were some things that happened in healthcare. We know that in healthcare, violence is even more prevalent than what you see in K-12. And then businesses started to get concerned. We had the person who went in and shot up the YouTube headquarters because she was offended about some of the videos that they were playing that she thought were animal cruelty. And so, organizations would call me up and say, hey, we never really thought about this before. What are some things that we should do to, two things, protect our employees, our customers, our assets, but also how do we reduce our liability when something bad does happen? Because you can't stop everything. You can't prepare for everything. You can prepare your staff to handle crisis, but you can't foresee everything that could possibly happen.
And that's so true, is that you can't foresee what's going to happen. And as a law enforcement person, you knew that, Gary, from the beginning, that you have to be ready with situational awareness to see when things could occur, being really alert all times. I've talked to other security experts tell me that, Keith. And that's a big thing, Keith, is understanding to prepare yourself before it happens, Keith, right?
Right. If we spend a lot of time with organizations helping them write their safety plans. And, if the first thing that you have to do when an emergency happens is grab your manual to see what you're supposed to do, you're already behind the 8 ball. You should have a pretty good understanding that my first 2 responsibilities in any emergency is going to be life safety, and then how do I keep it from getting worse? You talk about situational awareness, you talk about not being able to prepare for everything. Those of us that, read the report on 9/11, it was a failure of imagination. We couldn't believe that could happen. Therefore, we didn't plan for it. And now everybody has a plan for that kind of attack. And situational awareness, if we could just get people to look up and look around, and then to see something, say something, do something, that's going to help prevent so many bad things from happening.
Yeah. So dusting off the safety plan is a great point to bring up, because that's also where training comes in. If you're training more frequently, then it makes a huge difference in how people respond and act based on their safety plan.
Absolutely. We talk about it as a, we're a risk management company. It is primarily what we do. With all of our things, whether we're helping organizations write emergency operation plans, doing training, exercises, security and vulnerability assessment, everything is risk management. And as you said, if all I have is a really great set of plans, but I've never trained anybody, then all I have is a theory. And so, what we say is, if something bad happens, you're going to be sitting in an office, not in a courtroom, and you're going to be talking to lawyers. And the first thing they're going to ask is, did you have an emergency operation plan? And if you say no, then they're going to start adding zeros. And then they're going to ask, did you train your employees on this plan? And if you say no, they're going to start adding zeros. And then they're going to say, did you ever do an exercise to test your plan in your training? And if you say no, now there's more zeros. So we help you write your emergency operation plans. We help you train your employees. And then we run Homeland Security and exercise evaluation protocols or program to test your plans and your training. Because when it's done, we ask a couple of questions. We ask, what did we do well? What would we do differently the next time? Do we need to change our plans? Do we need to change our training? So if you show all of that you have this thing in place and something bad happens, you're going to pay. Your insurance company is going to get to a point and they're going to say, what does it take to make these people go away and happy? And they'll pay out. But as a CEO or a superintendent, the news media is not going to say to you, well, you should have known this was going to happen. Why didn't you plan? Why didn't you prepare? Why didn't you train? Well, we put all those things in place because that's just smart business sense.
So how do organizations create those plans? Because some of them don't have them, do they, Gary?
No. And here's a nice thing, and I hope all your listeners understand this. There are tons of free resources for any organization. I don't care if it's a school, a church, a business. If you use OSHA, if you use ready.gov, if you use Homeland Security, there are things that are out there. And the steps are really simple. The first thing you do is you start out with the team. You get together people in your organization, whether they're management, line workers, custodians, salespeople, everybody. You need to have everybody on your team that's going to have buy-in, because if I'm the CEO of the company and I go and I buy this plan and I say, here, then people are going to say, well, wait a minute, these aren't the things that concern me. These aren't the things that I worry about. So that's why you need to have a team approach. And the other thing that when you talk about your team approach, take LENSEC. LENSEC is an expert in their field of business, but if it came to writing safety plans, who's your expert? Well, who could I tap into? Well, I could tap into my fire department. I could tap into my police department. I could tap into my state or local EMA. I can talk to the health department. There are people out there that's all they want to do is help organizations, schools, churches, anyone with their plans. So get this team together. And then the second thing you'll have to do is you're going to have to conduct a risk assessment. What truly are your hazards? I live in Central Ohio. Do we have a plan for a hurricane? Well, yeah, we do. Why? Because back in, I think, 97, 98, Hurricane Ike came through Florida and made its way all the way up to Ohio and dumped a ton of water and wind and damaged some buildings. Now, we don't have hurricanes in Ohio, but we have plans for those kind of things. We know where our for example, if you look at Columbus, Ohio, there's a 270 outer belt that runs around that. 71 runs north and south, 70 runs east and west. And hazardous material is not allowed to go through 70, 71. They have to take the outer belt. So if we have organizations that are around the outer belt, we list as one of their hazards a possible chemical spill. We know where the fuel depots are. We know where the trains go through. We know where airports are. We know if we're in a flood zone, if there's earthquakes. So do an assessment that accurately represents what your organization is going to face. And you need to understand, for most organizations, the big thing they always worry about is an active killer, active threat, active shooter. And you need to have a plan for that. But I want you to think, if you are a medical, you manufacture medical equipment, chances are you're not going to have an active shooter, but there's a good chance one of your employees might have a heart attack. Do you have a plan for that? There's a good chance that in your cafeteria, somebody might choke. Do you have choking signs up? So don't just focus on one thing. Focus on the things that are most likely to occur, and that's what your threat assessment. And then, what are our performance objectives? What do we expect to get out of this? How do we expect our people to respond if there's an emergency? Have you empowered your employees to call 911? Have you empowered them to pull the fire alarm? Have you empowered them to grab the AED and send somebody else to call 911? These are the things that you think about that, hey, if we write this plan and something happens, this is what we expect our employees to do because they helped us write the plan and we trained them in the plan. And so it was interesting. This was years ago. I was at a school district, and there were probably 750 staff members. I had the police, I had the fire, I had all these folks there. And what was interesting is I asked who in this room is allowed to call the fire department, who's allowed to call 911, and I got a lot of this. And I said, come on, and the superintendent said, well, come on, this makes common sense. No, if you don't tell people they can do this, they're not going to know. And so you empower them to make decisions. So when we do the training, like I said, I tell them I can't train you for everything, but I always want you to remember this, no matter what, the two priorities, life safety, how do I prevent this getting worse? So if you take an active shooter situation, number one, life safety, let's keep people from being killed. Number two, how do I prevent this from getting worse? Do I secure my people in a place? Do I get them out of the building? I've got somebody in the conference room and they're eating a bagel and they start choking on the bagel. What are my two priorities? Life safety, keep them from choking, keep it from getting worse, call 911 as soon as you can. So you keep harping on those things. So step 4 then is we're going to need to create some kind of written policy. And again, I'm going to throw back to you, OSHA, OSHA, OSHA. You can get me, a guy like me, I'm a dime a dozen, and I can come in and I can help you write all different kinds of things. Or you can go and you could look at OSHA stuff and you could say, okay, why should I use OSHA over Gary stuff? Well, if there's a lawsuit and they ask you, where did your plans come from? Well, this guy named Gary, we know him from Ohio, we brought him in. Or I use plans that OSHA recommended. OSHA has a lot more stock behind them than I do. Now, that doesn't mean you don't need a guy like me to help you with your training or your exercises or to put all that together. I'm just saying, use the resources that are out there. It's so funny. I'll go to businesses, I'll go to colleges, I'll go to hospitals, and I always ask, where's that one room? And they say, what room? The room where the CFO rolls around in all that extra money. It's not there. So let's take advantage of the free stuff that we have in place.
Yeah, I'm sure you've got a list of resources as long as your arm. Let's say, for example, K-12 schools. I know you do a lot of work there. A K-12 school may or may not want to hire you as their consultant. I hope they do. But if they don't, you've got resources that are readily available that they can easily go to, and you can just list them out. And if these people put together the right committee and find the right resources, they can do some of this work on their own.
So a couple of things. So there's a ed.gov, REMS, Readiness and Emergency Management Schools Technical Assistance Center. They are, information is from Homeland Security and the U.S. Department of Education. And they have phenomenal stuff, and everything is free. So, for example, I do security and vulnerability assessments, and after Parkland, I had a school district in Alaska call me, and they said, we have 24 sites, and we want you to come up and do a security and vulnerability assessment for each of our sites. And I told them, I said, there is zero way you can afford me. Okay, because that's going to take over a month for me to do that. And each one's going to cost you X amount per site. I said, I want to show you what the U.S. Department of Education has for free that'll do the exact same thing that I do. And it's a tool. It's called Site Assess. It's free. And I said, now call me if you need help using this, but this is what you ought to do. And they called me a couple of weeks later and they said, thank you so much. This is going to save us so much money. Outstanding. That's really, and I realize that might be a dumb business model on my part, but I'm really more concerned about how do we keep students and staff safe, and if they ever want me to come up and do training, I'll gladly come up and do training. But I just think that if there's something there that's free, that's, again, U.S. Department of Education and Homeland Security developed this, why wouldn't you use that?
By the way, if you do have that room full of money that the CFO rolls around in, go ahead and call Gary at Safeguard Risk Solutions, because he'll do a great job for you.
Yeah, because I'd like to have that room myself, to be honest with you.
Now, looking at another important thing is talk about defining what crisis management is, because a lot of times people miss that point. We talk about creating that plan, emergency response plan, but crisis management, that's different, right, than just the plan.
Crisis management and emergency operation plans all go together. Your crisis management plan is, if this here happens, how are we going to respond here? Okay, and it's a process. And if you look at for example, the 4 phases of emergency management that FEMA talk about: prevention and mitigation. We cannot prevent tornado, but we can mitigate if it happens. Right. We can prevent unauthorized entry into our buildings. So there's prevention and mitigation. Then the next part is your planning. This is what are we going to do? How are we going to handle this? Who's in charge? Who's our incident commander? What happens when we're in unified command? And then your response. What will we do when this happens? Who's in charge of what, and how are they going to do it? What resources they will use? And then finally, the last piece is recovery. And we tend to forget recovery. This is how do we get back to the business of running our business? And so let's say, for example, you're a small organization. Maybe you're a real estate office, and one of your employees, in the middle of the day, you're having a meeting, an employee has a sudden massive heart attack and dies. And this employee was well-liked, established in the community, was a mentor to new realtors. That's going to have a negative impact on your office. And the people who witnessed that, who saw the medics try to save their life, and they're going to be negatively impacted. How are you going to help them get back to the business of selling houses again? And so that recovery piece, we tend to forget. So when we talk about crisis management, it's often talked about as a big circle: planning and prevention, or prevention mitigation, planning, response, recovery. And, as a professional in the industry, what I do is, when I see something bad happen somewhere else, I take a look at the organizations that I work with and I say, if that happened to their organization, are they ready? Do they have plans for it? Are their employees trained? Have they practiced this? So that's, when we keep moving through this, that's why you have to have an emergency response team. You have to have people in your building, your organization, that if there is a heart attack, who's been trained in the AEDs? Who knows first aid? Who knows how to do these? And they're going to respond. So again, that's part of your emergency management, is who's going to take things. You're going to have to train your employees. One of the big things we're doing right now that I like is organizations across the United States, we're doing bleed control. You know that if there's a serious injury, the biggest problem that's going to be is somebody's going to bleed out. Well, how do we stop that? So we're training people on how to stop major wound bleeds, whether it's on the arms or legs or body cavity. We're teaching them, we're giving them the tools, because that's what's going to happen is people are going to bleed out. And then finally, when you trained everybody, you got to do exercises. I mean, think about when you went to school, fire drills. What was the purpose of a fire drill? To let you know where to go, when you left, and how to account for everybody. We have to do that for everything. They don't have to be frightening. It's funny, you go to some of these large warehouses and you say, when have you ever done a fire drill? Well, we've never done one. We're adults here. People know how to get out. Well, you got to do that. So I probably rambled a little bit too much.
Yeah. No, you've explained it well. It's the management part's the checklist.
Yeah.
And the response plan is, well, okay, this is our plan. Who's going to implement it? So, and it's almost consultation, a security consultant team, whoever that leader is, to make sure everything is put in place and it responds correctly. So you're managing that to make sure all those things happen. So when a crisis does occur, you're able to.
It reminds me sort of Gary, we've talked a little bit before about some of these big organizations or big facilities, maybe schools or colleges or big businesses that, develop a plan with muster points outside of their locations where people are designated to go to. If you don't plan that out and designate, hey, this wing is going to this muster point, this group of offices and buildings are going to this muster point. And somebody's got to know this plan in each of these points. So you have to have points of contact who know what the plan are. And if they don't get trained on it, then people go to the wrong place. You don't know where people are. You wind up there, it becomes a big mess. So planning this out requires a lot of skill and a lot of forethought before the tragedy happens.
You end up with two different tools. The first thing you start with is this thing called an emergency operation plan, and I often call that the view from 10,000 feet. That's the why of emergency management. That's that big 3-ring binder that is great for blocking doors open when the weather gets hot.
Yeah.
But then if you walk into a lot of organizations, they have a flip chart for their employees, and that's an emergency response plan. That's the what. Because if I'm an employee and there's an active shooter in the building, or if somebody's having a heart attack, I don't need to know why I'm allowed to take action. I just need to know what to do. Mm-hmm. So that's why that ERP is so much smaller, because it just tells me, what do you want me to do? And that's what I'm going to do. And when we go back to, I was working with a large office complex, and we actually had go bags that were hanging on cubicles, and it was different people were assigned that, okay, if the fire alarm goes off, I grab this because it has the current roster, it has phone numbers, it has a vest, it has all those things, and we trained 3 deep in case that one person who was supposed to grab that go bag happened to be absent that day.
Okay, so I'm understanding completely the fact of the matter is that you create a plan first. In success in anything, you have to have a plan first, and then you have to assign who's responsible for everything by creating the team. And then lastly, that last part of the plan is the management. Somebody making sure that director, that leader of the security team makes sure everyone's responsibilities are met and that everyone understands their responsibilities.
Right, and that happens through training and exercises. And it can be an easy training thing. For example, if you happen to get a phone call from a reporter, Keith, and they say, hey, we want to ask you a couple questions about LENSEC and this, are you allowed to just talk to them, or do you have to give it to the PIO? Do you have someone who speaks for the company? And so you think about that. Well, why wouldn't we want our employees to talk to the news media? Well, because they don't have all the information. And so you could just have in a staff meeting, hey, today we're going to talk about our emergency operation plans. And today what we're going to cover is dealing with the media. And if you get a media inquiry, here is our procedure for dealing with the media. And right there, you've just done a training. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be formal. It doesn't have to have movie. You just train people what to do.
Training is such an important part of the success of a business, a security, whatever part of the organization. Training is key. Without training, then the understanding of the employees, they don't get it. Whoever's enters the building doesn't understand it. And in this time that what we're dealing with, training is so key. So contact Gary for sure. But Gary, let's talk about technology now. Putting together that security team, talking about specifically enough, implementing the plan, having the plan in place, management of that plan. You need to have other tools, not just people involved in it. And that's one thing you do with your company, correct?
Yeah, we have an app and a website that allows people to access their emergency operation plans. That is so that they can be updated 24/7 and they don't have to print. We definitely recommend camera systems, locking doors, key card access, everything integrated with your fire alarm, so that there could be a force multiplier. In the old days, we had the watchman who had the key clock who would walk around and he'd turn to prove that he walked around. Well, now if I could have somebody monitoring my whole facility, and if an alarm goes off because the door's open, or if the temperature rose too high in our refrigeration unit, or, I just want to scan the parking lot to make sure that no trespassers, those are all things that you still need people, but instead of having that person walking around, now we have them watching. Instead of having somebody at the front desk checking people in, people can just key card and it keeps track. Those are the types of technology that I think are relatively inexpensive. Definitely reduce your liability, because you can show that you're monitoring things, you're keeping out an eye out to make sure your employees are safe. So there's a fine balance between some of the technology that's out there and the cost, and are we really going to see the return on investment? But if I could replace, 3 security officers with a camera system that did the same thing as them walking around, that's a good return on investment.
It becomes a proactive approach to monitor your security, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you've got Joe Blow sitting in front of monitors watching cameras all day long. It's become a much more technologically advanced system to be able to use integrations between different softwares, where you've got your access control talking to your video surveillance solution. And so now your notifications are automated, and you're automating processes to make it so much easier than having that one guy who's sitting there watching monitors all day long.
And then that ability to now be able to do it in so many different ways is fantastic. Now, what the most important thing in our conversation, I think, that everyone wants to know from a security expert, especially in these areas, COVID-19, it's different for every different organization. How are they handling it? And how much of that now the plans are being rewritten because of it?
Right.
Not only are the plans being rewritten, but they're being rewritten every day based on new information. What people forget is when we first started talking about COVID-19, it was a new coronavirus. And so what we knew in January in terms of how this spreads compared to today dictates how we're going to start to do things. And we do know that masks can be an effective layer. And I think really when you're looking at COVID-19, look at it the way you do any security. There's no therapy and there's no vaccine. Mm-hmm. So that has not changed since January. We do have better information, and the information that we're getting is layers. What are the different things that we can do that will never stop the spread? We're never going to be able to stop the spread of COVID-19. What are some things that we could do to reduce the spread? And that's what organizations need to be thinking about. Hand sanitizer. What kind of mask or face shields? How do we distance our employees? I think one of the greatest things we've seen so far is that in this country, we're learning that, hey, I guess we don't always have to go into work every day. We can get a lot of things done remotely. And we're starting to see more medical treatment done remotely. So that's a good thing. But I can't remotely go to a Zoom meeting and get a dozen wings and some fries and a beer. So there are certain things that we're going to need to be able to go out and do. And so what we have to look at is, what is the best science telling us of the things we as an organization can do to make sure that we reduce the spread of COVID-19.
Mm-hmm. And I think, Keith, that's the thing that we all have to look at is each organization is different. It's not a one-size-fits-all type security plan.
That's right. Well, each business has to consider their own trajectory, and they have to consider their own priorities, and having a security consultant could help. But you know what you need. We at LENSEC know what we need for our business to operate well. And, thankfully, we've been working remotely all along. And so that helps. We've got people all over the place. But other businesses are scrambling to try to figure out what happens next. Right now, the schools are scrambling, trying to figure out, how are they going to get the kids back in the buildings again and still keep them safe? And, how many kids can you have per classroom? And they're really working hard to figure this stuff out. And we had recently, we had Guy Grace on talking about this, and Guy's a great expert. And by the way, he just won Director of the Year for Campus Safety Magazine. So that was a big win for him. But Guy is a really great expert that was able to tell us what schools are thinking about as they're planning and preparing for getting kids back in school. And each business needs to be sitting down and thinking about this. How are we going to get back to work? How are we going to continue to work? Are things going to change? After everything settles down, what are we going to do differently? And so it's a big thing that everybody has on their mind right now.
Well, if I could piggyback on what Neil said, that it's different for every business, it goes back to what I said. You have to do an individual risk assessment for your organization, because what they may be doing in a dentist's office is not the same thing that we would be doing in a sales office. So that's where your risk assessment is going to come into play.
Right. Where can we find information on you and stuff, and people can contact you? You said you're so busy right now. I appreciate you taking the time, but where can people find more information on you? Where can they go?
So our website is safeguardrisksolutions.com. My email address is gary@safeguardrisksolutions.com. You can go to our website. You can see what kind of work we do. You can take a look at our product. You can shoot me an email, give me a call. And even if you, again, this is a dumb business model. Even if you just have a question and you're looking for an answer, don't be afraid to give me a call or shoot me an email. And because it doesn't cost me anything to answer a phone call or an email. I'm really interested in just helping people stay safe. That's
why you're busy all the time, Gary, because of it. A lot of people don't give away just to give them an understanding. And by having that phone or email evaluation really gives somebody an idea. Well, I want to work with Gary because I don't want to think about those things. And as a business owner thinks about that, or somebody that is running an organization, they really don't want to think about certain things. So they need to hire someone like Gary. All right, Keith, anything to add before we say goodbye? Because I always ask you at the end, anything to summarize from this?
Be safe out there and plan ahead.
I like that. Be safe out there and plan ahead. And things are changing every day. When Keith is talking about schools, well, the newest things are out there. Certain people are saying they're going to go back. Other people are saying it's going to be different. I'm interested to see how colleges do for August going into the school year, and schools that have to open up now, what will happen in September. And it all will depend, so you got to stay tuned. But for the latest news in security, you can go to lensec.com/live and check out all of our interviews, or at lensec.com. We have all this great information. It falls on also different social media sites. And again, it was another great What's Your Perspective, and I appreciate, Gary, for you stopping by.
Thank you.
All right, take care, guys. That was LENSEC Live. What's Your Perspective?